Well, greetings. Welcome back to Trinity Place. My name is Cam Miller, and this is a reflection on the second Sunday of Lent. And it begins with my thoughts about a friend of mine who, with a younger wife, had his first child at age 49. He was both ecstatic and joyful, as well as anxious in anticipation of having a kid or kids in college at age 70. I told Katie that I didn't want to be 40 and still having kids, and I was 41 when my youngest was born. But 90 and 99? Who in any world would ever think that that was a good idea? Having and raising a baby at those old ages is every bit as much bad news as Jesus talking about losing your life for his sake. And Jesus, who thinks giving up your life to save it is a great sales pitch? Honestly, I don't know what to say today in relation to the Hebrew scripture and the gospel. So instead I'm going to echo a proverb that an old classmate from high school sent me this week in reference to a newspaper column. Like cold water to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. Proverbs 25:25. That's lovely, isn't it? Like cold water to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. Thank you, Kathy. We are in the wilderness and in need of some good news. A little bit of cold water would help to slake our parched thirst. And that's what I want to be preaching. The theme of our Lenten worship, though, is wilderness wandering. But that's kind of ridiculous, too, because we've been stuck in the wilderness of pandemic social distancing for almost a year now. Wow. We have no need to make up hard liturgical themes for the sake of a Lenten practice because we're living it. So I'm hard-pressed right now to squeeze lemonade out of those biblical lemons. Yes, Abraham and Sarah is an epic odyssey. Odyssey that has served as the prototype of faithfulness in three world religions for a millennium, more than a millennium. And yes, Jesus' condemnation of Peter and his command to pick up your cross and follow him is about as famous a line as there is in the gospel. But both of them are hard news to us. We are grounded, probably bonded by the stuff we own. Too much stuff to go wandering off at the drop of a hat like Abram did. Too much prosperity and too much security and too much just plain cool stuff to lose it all. In fact, we don't even know how or why we would give it up or lose it all for Jesus' sake anyway. How would that even happen these days? So for me, in the midst of wilderness, pandemic style, it feels like too much work to rope in abstract stories that we read this morning. Too much work to bring them close enough to find a home in them. I almost really don't know what to say. But regrettably, I do know this. That we live at right angles with biblical wisdom. Truly, we really do. In our world, we assume success is the goal. Accumulation of wealth is the measure of success. Greatness is measured by how important and powerful and famous we are. Power is very much a part of that success model that we have. Material comfort is part of that success. In fact, material comfort is just really good. Material comfort is so good, our standards for the difference between abundance and opulence has basically been rendered meaningless. And education is part of that success too, because it's one of the key ingredients to achievement and therefore to greatness and power. Security is part of how we measure success. The more secure we are, the happier we'll be. And we all know that happiness is a critical criteria to success because Thomas Jefferson said so. In fact, the pursuit of happiness is widely assumed to be a gospel value. That's weird. But longevity also, a long, healthy life lived well, without too much suffering and with a quiet, peaceful death at the end, is also rendered part of success. So, to summarize all that, our assumptions about success and what makes for a good life in our culture are wealth, greatness, power, material comfort, education, security, happiness, and a long, healthy life with a peaceful ending. These are the prizes of a good life in our culture. Oh, and we need to add a few more to that list, of course. Beauty, love, and good hair. None of these criteria for success and a good life are even controversial for us. Even the once criticized craven decadence of American materialism and consumerism is now mostly taken for granted. When we put these criteria of ours up alongside the biblical description of success in a good life, well, they don't necessarily overlap much. Life lived in relationship with God is the number one biblical wisdom. Life lived in relationship with God. And it's not even questioned. It's what, in biblical wisdom, defines good. Then there is fidelity to the norms of our relationship with God. Fidelity to the norms of our relationship with God. Living in close proximity to those norms is the criteria of success for biblical wisdom. Mercy, kindness, compassion, justice, servanthood. Those are the standards of success, the criteria for biblical wisdom. Those are the standards for the good life. Now, compare that to personal acquisition of power, wealth, security, and achievement, and they don't match up much. The biblical wisdom has a grounded, earthy application to it. The way goodness and success are judged in the promised land is by how well its resources are shared. Living in fidelity to the norms of relationship with God means that nobody does without. That's what makes the promised land, by the way. That's what makes it a land flowing with milk and honey. It's what makes it good, is that the goodness is shared. In fact, for biblical wisdom, land minimizes the dangers of drought and enslavement. And you can imagine that for previously enslaved people and for peasants. While land also increases the opportunity to build an equitable community. Land is actually, in biblical literature, a metaphor for fidelity with God and with one another. Living in fidelity is how that land was going to be kept. And infidelity is how that land would be lost. So living in relationship with God and fidelity to the norms of that relationship is pretty much how our spiritual wisdom describes the good life, a successful life. Spiritual good describes a way of being in relationship, whereas our cultural definition of the good life describes possession and benefits to the self. Being in relationship to and having stuff for the self is our wisdom. Being in fidelity to God and an equitable relationship with the community is biblical wisdom. Now, I don't want to go overboard. Biblical wisdom does not disdain money or power or greatness or health or comfort or security and all the rest. It does not preclude the possibility of being a wealthy, comfortable, successful, and healthy person who lives in fidelity with the norms of relationship with God and with the community. But what we know from our own experience is that the culturally defined goodness that is all about acquisition is far more compelling and dominant than the biblical notion of goodness that is about fidelity to relationships. What we also know is that the acquisition of good stuff, it makes us forget. It makes us forget about the primacy of fidelity to relationships. Getting all the good things our culture defines as good and measures as success, it kind of confuses us. And that's why Peter can recognize Jesus as the Messiah and then turn around and tell Jesus to stop talking about hard choices and dangerous possibilities and other scary stuff. And that's why Jesus gets so angry with Peter. It is because it's hard enough for Jesus to stay in fidelity to his relationship with God without Peter trying to convince him that there's some other equally good and less painful choices to be made. Something about money and comfort and security and power and greatness and all of that stuff makes us forget the primacy of fidelity. Something about it kind of confuses us at the very moments that we need to be most clear. And in that story we heard, Jesus is really trying hard to stay clear, and Peter's making it murky again. Now, knowing Peter, he probably had a moment of clarity also, but immediately reverted to forgetfulness and confusion. I think we all do that pretty well. I know I do. Biblical wisdom's measure of success in the good life is fidelity to relationship with God. That fidelity is practiced with all those community-related norms that do not necessarily have the self at the center. Now, that doesn't seem like a very good idea to us. And so we pull the hoodie of opposing desires and acquisitions over our head and pull the strings. You can see now why I didn't have much to say. In the midst of pandemic, when it's already a difficult time, who wants to listen to biblical wisdom when there's so much else to distract us a little bit and to make us feel more comfortable in this difficult time? I know I should have more to say on this important topic, but that's all I got right now. I hope it offers a little bit to chew on. The peace of God be always with you.